bit about what it was like to be a Confederate soldier. This and much more right here on Pennsylvania Country Roads every Sunday morning at 7 a.m.
Watch PCN's coverage of Pennsylvania politics and policy, history and culture, sports, and more with the PCN app. Stream live events and video on demand in HD from your favorite device. Go to PCNTV.com to start streaming today.
The eyes of the nation are on Pennsylvania as a key influencer to the 2020 election. PCN has over 25 years of trusted state government coverage. Our network is your platform to connect directly with Pennsylvania voters. Whether it's a presidential race, statewide campaign, or local cause, our viewers are ready to hear from you. Book your ad now. PCN, your access to Pennsylvania voters.
Join our guests for insights on issues impacting local government and the citizens of Pennsylvania. Created by the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs, Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs connects you to legislation and policy that will affect you and your family. Your host, Chris Kapp, and his guests discuss current affairs that matter to you most. Connect with your state by tuning into Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs on Sundays here on PCN.
Stephen Caruso is a reporter with the Pennsylvania Capital Star. Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Now, the governor recently extended the emergency declaration related to COVID-19. Why did he feel the need to do that?
Well, we are still in the midst of this pandemic. I think the effects don't seem as obvious. We're sort of in a bit of a lull, but at the same time, Pennsylvania on, I believe it was Friday or Thursday of last week, had over 1,000 new cases. We haven't seen that number in over a month and a half. Wolf has overall just taken a very cautious tone. He's been skeptical of any of his executive powers. He has, and the state emergency code specifically says it's the job of the governor to address emergencies in the Commonwealth. So I think he's taking that really seriously, and he doesn't want to be left in a situation where he says everything's fine, I'm giving up these emergency powers, and then in 2 weeks, all of a sudden, they're seeing, like, the Department of Health is seeing cases look, or their indicators look worse, and he wants to take serious action. So Wolf is just, I think, being extremely cautious about how he gives up his power, and he wants to hold on to that.
How have the Republicans in the General Assembly responded?
Not happy, Phil. So overall, we've seen this for basically the last 6 months or so. I mean, I believe it was the 6th anniversary last week when Wolf had first issued the order. Overall, the entire time, General Assembly, especially the Republican leadership, has been saying, give us more of a say, give us more heads up on what you're doing. We want some ability to, just have an input on what's happening. So for Wolf to reissue it, what I would believe would be for roughly a third or fourth time this emergency declaration, then this is it was basically just seemed to feed in the narrative that Wolf is being a tyrant, as to use the word that's often thrown around. And there was a press conference. They attacked him for a lack of transparency earlier in the pandemic. Wolf seemed to he hadn't held an in-person press conference in a while. There's some issues with the right to know offices. Some of those issues have gotten better. They've been processing right to knows, for example, but in general, it just served as kind of another way to feed the Republican narrative that Wolf is abusing his executive powers.
Now, how's the public responded? Is there any sense of maybe emergency fatigue?
I think that there is a very vocal minority of people who have emergency fatigue. Going off of public polling that we've seen, whether it is Monmouth, which is one of the most recent results, Wolf very consistently has over 50%, if not over 60% of likely voters saying they're happy with his job. I think that it depends on where you're in the Commonwealth. I'm sure that majorities of people in rural counties that are not as impacted by the virus, who don't see as much of an impact, are wondering, why am I forced to have the same restrictions that a Montgomery County or a Philadelphia or a Pittsburgh has? And that's understandable. But statewide, based off of all the public polling we've seen, it appears that a very large majority of people are either approve or very strongly approve of Governor Wolf's actions in this pandemic.
Now, along with the emergency declaration over the past few months has been a suspension of evictions for people who are renting or who perhaps couldn't pay their rent. But Governor Wolf has allowed that to lapse, and he's now calling on the General Assembly to take action. What is he looking to do?
Yeah, so this is kind of one of those examples of why Republicans critique executive power. So Wolf, I've been talking to legal experts. Wolf stepped in after a Supreme Court ordered ban on evictions ended in about May. Wolf came in and he used his powers to basically effectively ban evictions by removing this notice requirement. So, because the governor does not control the court system, he just kind of found a loophole in state law that let him do an effective ban on evictions. That was extended once in July until the end of August. And the reason it was extended was because of massive grassroots pressure from Democrats, particularly like progressive Democrats, saying we cannot be tossing people out of their homes in the middle of this pandemic. There have been calls from the grassroots left to just cancel rent. I mean, this is a really strong issue for, I think, urban progressives. Is like, why are we arguing over this? We just need to keep people in their homes. So when it came to the end of August, Wolf, who has been very bullish on his executive powers, according to experts, had basically just kind of said, I don't have any more authority to extend this. And he asked for the General Assembly to do something. He asked for them to fix a rental program that was set up in July based off of some federal money. And he also just asked for them, debate amongst themselves, as lawmakers are to do, about, how should you handle an eviction moratorium? How do you just make sure people don't get evicted en masse? But legal experts I talked to were kind of very surprised by this. Maybe Wolf couldn't extend it again, even though he already extended it once over the 90 days that I believe he said in a letter he had. Then the order ended up lasting about 116 days. But Wolf, there went in efforts to stop Wolf's emergency declaration. Wolf has repeatedly said, and it appears completely legal, that he can just, yes, if you manage to legislatively end my order, I will issue a new one. And then you just have to do it again and continue this cycle of me issuing orders and you ending them by the legislative process. So Wolf would be probably completely within his rights, according to legal experts, to just extend it again or issue another order again and then just let somebody challenge him. That's not the route he shows. He's admitted to such. He's hid behind legal language, but in a press conference about a week or 2 weeks ago, Wolf hinted himself. He was like, I think this eviction moratorium has a natural life to it. That if I extend it again, then we're going to deal with these same pressures at the end of September, at the end of October. Like, where does it end? And so it's a really tricky situation because now Wolf, after making so many decisions by executive action, he is now kind of punting to the General Assembly and saying, like, I need you to do something. And there are certainly actions that needs to be done. As I mentioned, our rental program, as highlighted by Spotlight PA, is a bit of a mess. The amount of money that can go to renters, and remember, there are millions of renters. There are potentially hundreds of thousands who could face eviction, maybe tens of thousands. The max payment for our rental assistance program goes to about $750. That's sometimes half of rent in some cities such as Philadelphia. But it's sort of a big problem that's going to impact hundreds of thousands of people, and it's hard to see what's going to happen. I don't know if there's any hunger in the General Assembly to clean up what they see as Wolf's own mess. But we could see action, though. We're coming up on an election and moods change very quickly.
Now, another issue that relates to this was also a suspension of public utility shutoffs. And the Public Utility Commission met recently, and you reported on that. What did they decide?
So just like with the eviction moratorium, there's been that utility moratorium shutoff, as you mentioned, or moratorium on utility shutoffs. And what they for the third time deadlocked. So the board is one person short. So normally it's 5 members. Right now it's down to 4. And for 3 straight months, June, July, August, the board has met. A motion has been put forth to end a moratorium, and the board voted 2-2. So there was no action taken. This moratorium was put in place in March, when everything was getting particularly bad with COVID. It was held in place, until June. But now utility companies are getting very concerned that they're going to, like, people who are already behind on bills are going to fall further behind, and that, people who aren't behind are going to continue to be behind. And it's kind of, raises the whole moral hazard question of, when you don't have people beating their bills, will you just encourage them to never pay them? And, so far we've seen no changes. This moratorium will likely end in some fashion. The Democratic chairman, a Wolf appointee, Gladys Brown, has said that, like, she is in favor of ending it in some way, at least an absolute moratorium. It seems like, though, she is very interested in consumer protection, to make sure that, if there needs to be a moratorium kept for very low income customers, if there needs to be a strong repayment program set up, those are all negotiations that are happening behind the scenes I'm not privy to. I'd also just point out that, the Inquirer and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette have been doing excellent coverage of this issue as well. I've relied a lot on them, but it's important to highlight that with this eviction moratorium, we also have this utility shutoff moratorium, and both of them are going to be really critical for low-income families who are still struggling to get back on their feet amid the pandemic.
Now, you cover the House for the Pennsylvania Capital Star, and the House is scheduled to be back in session on September 15th. Any indication of any big issues that they're planning to take up?
Well, it's hard to say quite yet. There are some committee hearings on the state's unemployment system. There's committee hearings on trans healthcare issues. I haven't seen a schedule quite yet. I would assume elections are still going to be on the table. A bill the House passed last week, Wolf has already said he'll veto. So that could mean that negotiations kick back in gear. There's still $1 billion in CARES funding that's yet unspent. Republicans have kept that money really close to the chest on plans for it. But, there's going to be a lot to talk about with between leftover CARES money, a budget that still needs to be prepared for the second half of the year, and election bills. So expect probably lots of closed-door discussions to figure out, what can we actually get done with an election 2 months away.
Well, we've been speaking with Stephen Caruso. He's a reporter with the Pennsylvania Capital Star. Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Did you know you can watch all of your favorite PCN originals and more at home or on the go? Download the PCN app on your favorite device and tune in to see what makes Pennsylvania's heart beat. Watch videos on demand, see multiple live streams, and check out the free selected programs and events. PCN, Pennsylvania Politics and Policy, History and Culture, Sports, and more.
We're now joined by Zach Shamberg. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. Thank you for joining me.
Phil, thanks for having me.
Now, we're several months into the pandemic, and long-term care facilities have been particularly affected by the pandemic. What are some of the challenges that they've been facing in terms of employing people and maintaining employment of their workers?
Sure. Yeah, you look back at this pandemic, and a few months ago, there was a term that was born, and I think we all know it by now, and that term is healthcare heroes. And when I think about the nursing homes, personal care homes, assisted living communities across our state and really across the country, the term healthcare heroes couldn't fit a population or a workforce better than it does for our long-term care workers. The CNAs, the RNs, the physicians, the staff who are really on the front lines at the epicenter of this epidemic. But it's also worth noting that, if we rewind the clocks back just a year before the COVID-19 pandemic started, long-term care was in the midst of one of the greatest workforce crises or workforce shortages that the sector has ever experienced. And the COVID-19 pandemic really exacerbated those problems or the concerns that providers had with how are we going to care for mom and dad. And it just so happens that even our own Auditor General, Eugene D. Pasquale, issued a report last August titled, "Who Will Care for Mom and Dad?" So those workforce challenges have certainly been amplified. They've been exacerbated. I think that providers are trying to make it through certainly phase one of this virus. They're looking to what's next, and they're looking to ensure that they're going to have staff who are able to care for our residents in what is, Phil, the third oldest state in terms of population in the entire country.
Now, there is some legislation in going through the House and the Senate attempting to deal with some of these workforce issues. One would place temporary nurse aides on the Certified Nurse Aide Registry. How important is a bill like that?
We fought for months to get that temporary nurse aide training program just up and running in Pennsylvania. But the challenge is, if the emergency declaration ended today, nearly 3,000 Pennsylvanians who have become temporary nurse aides would lose their jobs immediately. So we want to make sure that these folks who have taken an online training, who have been in training on the job in a nursing home, in a personal care home, in an assisted living community, who have spent more than 80 hours on the floor learning during a pandemic, we want to make sure that those folks have positions, that they have employment long after this pandemic ends. And we're going to do everything we can to ensure that that bill goes to the governor's desk.
Now, is there other legislation that you would like to see or that is in process right now?
Yeah, it's not in process right now, but as we look at what's next for long-term care and this industry, we need to cut down on the bureaucratic red tape that unfortunately has plagued business in long-term care and really business across Pennsylvania. It shouldn't be difficult to become a CNA. It shouldn't be overly difficult to get a position in our nursing homes, to receive more training, to be able to do online training, for instance. These are all things that, while there's not legislation pending now, there certainly needs to be in the future. And again, we look forward to working with the members of the legislature on that.
Now, during the pandemic, there were restrictions on visitors coming in to visit their family members during this time. But some of those restrictions have been lifted. They're calling them compassionate care visits. What are those, and how important are they for the residents?
Yeah, this is a program that originated in a few other states. I know Indiana has really taken a good look at it and has implemented it in their state. But what this would do for a resident with 2 or more changes in their care plan, and that could be as simple as weight loss, weight gain, or hair loss, they would be allowed a compassionate caregiver, someone who would come into the facility, whether it's actually at this point, it's only a nursing home, someone who could come into the nursing home, would get a temperature check, would have had to have been tested for COVID-19, but would be able to spend time with that resident. This could be a family member, this could be a friend, it could be a volunteer, someone who's approved by that resident. Again, to come in to see that resident, to ensure they're getting the care that they deserve, and to basically be with them on a daily basis.
Now, one of the topics that has come up frequently over the past few months is the importance of testing. And what types of testing requirements are in place, and how are long-term care facilities adapting to this environment?
Well, actually, last week, there was a new CMS testing requirement that became effective for every nursing home across the country. What it does is it looks at our county positivity rate. So if you have a 0 to 5% positivity rate, a 5 to 10, or a 10 and above, it requires the nursing home provider to test their staff on a frequency that basically goes right back to their positivity rate. So if you have a 10% or higher positivity rate, you as a nursing home are testing staff twice a week. 5 to 10 is once a week, 0 to 5 is once a month. This certainly creates challenges, and it's something the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association and other associations across the state have been advocating for since the beginning. We've been very supportive of recurring universal testing, but Phil, that comes at a cost. And it comes at a time cost to providers. So we want to make sure that there's funding available. We want to make sure that there's public-private partnerships available so that providers across the state are able to procure this testing and that it's sustainable to continue over the next few days, weeks, and ultimately months.
So when you say that funding should be available, is that something that you think should come from the federal government or the state government?
Well, there's federal government funding, the CARES Act, that is still available in Pennsylvania. By my count, there's almost or nearly $1 billion left in the federal CARES Act that Pennsylvania has yet to spend. We will advocate, and we have been advocating, that those dollars go to where they matter most or who deserves them the most. That's long-term care. That's the epicenter of this pandemic. So we do believe, and we've written letters to the governor, we've talked to members of the legislature, we do believe that some of that funding should go straight to testing for long-term care.
Now, you mentioned long-term care facilities as the epicenter of the pandemic. How are they accessing personal protective equipment and other resources that they need?
Yeah. So absent a vaccine, the two most important resources for long-term care providers are testing and it's PPE, personal protective equipment. And whether that's masks, gowns, gloves, or goggles, we know that will stop the virus from spreading from a staff member, from a resident to another resident. Things have gotten better. They're not where they need to be. And as we're in the valley, so to speak, of phase one of the COVID-19 pandemic, at least for long-term care, and as things have quieted down a little bit as we've now gotten through summer and we're headed into fall and flu season, providers are telling me, and they're telling members of the legislature, that PPE is starting to run low again. We're starting to see shortages. When there are mask mandates, for instance, like we have now in Pennsylvania, well, that means that there's less N95 masks to go around for long-term care providers. Again, to those who need those masks the most. So there are definitely shortages that we're concerned with. There are testing shortages we're concerned with. And again, as we enter flu season, we need to ensure that providers have the supplies that they need.
Now, recently, a report was released by the Center for Advocacy for the Rights and Interests of the Elderly and some other groups. They had a variety of recommendations, one of which was to authorize, encourage, and financially support a cohorting of COVID-positive residents. What would that mean for your members?
Yeah, so cohorting is basically creating COVID-specific floors, wings, or in fact, entire buildings so that providers can care for COVID-positive residents in one distinct area so that the virus really can't spread to the rest of the building. That is being done now. It's been implemented really since April of this year, so providers are doing it. I think to have funding available would certainly be important. Again, as we've talked about, funding is certainly an essential part of combating COVID-19 for providers. So I think, contained in that report, like this cohorting recommendation, I think there's some recommendations that providers could certainly benefit from moving forward.
Now, one of the other recommendations was that it would a mandate that hospitals would test patients before discharging them to a long-term care facility. Is that something that you think would be worthwhile?
Well, believe it or not, I do. Believe it or not, right now, hospitals are testing discharged patients who are going to nursing homes. But if you can believe it, the nursing home is not required, or it's not required of the hospital to wait to see what that test is, whether it's positive or negative, before they discharge to the nursing home. So basically that takes cohorting and keeping residents in the nursing home safe. That takes it totally out of the equation. So we would advocate for not just the tests being done, because they are being done right now. We need to ensure that the resident is either positive or negative before they're admitted into a nursing home.
Well, we've been speaking with Zach Shamberg. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. Zach, thank you for joining me.
Phil, thanks for having me.
For over 35 years, the Emmy Award-winning Weather World has provided in-depth statewide forecasts that you won't find anywhere else. Weather World gives you more than just tomorrow's weather. They offer long-range forecasts and unique content that answers the why, as well as the what, when, and how weather will affect your life. Weather World, from the Penn State Department of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science. Weekdays at 5:45 and available for free on the PCN app.
Representative Jesse Topper is a Republican who represents the 78th District, which includes parts of Bedford, Franklin, and Fulton counties. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're the sponsor of House Bill 2788, which deals with the ability of students and parents to have their kids maybe continue a little bit longer in school based depending on the coronavirus. Can you talk a little bit about what your bill would do?
Sure. Well, I was very supportive of Act 13, which was the emergency school code that helped us basically get through the end of last year. If you remember, that is really when the coronavirus started to take hold in Pennsylvania and school districts were shutting down and nobody really had a plan or knew what to do. None of us did. And so we just tried to make it as flexible for our school districts as possible. But we're in a different situation now. We've known what's out there. We have a lot more information, data, and our school districts have had time to prepare. And we need to make sure that these kids are actually not just getting a continuity of education, but that they're learning, that they're getting this new material. Because if we're going to keep moving them from grade level to grade level, they have to be able to have that access to that ongoing education that we just didn't see in the spring. And so what my bill would do, it would hopefully give parents some clarity and also some hope that if they see that this year does not go particularly well, whether it be a hybrid schedule or an all virtual schedule, and they don't feel that their child is ready to move on, that they have the ability to tell the school district, no, my son or daughter is not ready. They need to have this grade over again. And I'm hoping that, I know this would cause some issues for school districts. I'm hoping this incentivizes them to make sure that these kids are getting absolutely the best education that they can get, not just under these circumstances, Phil, but just period. That's what they deserve. These kids don't get these years back. And we need to make sure that they have access to high quality education right now. And we need to do everything we can to make that happen.
What does the current law allow regarding repeating grades?
Well, right now, it's usually in consultation with the school district. Maybe the school district will say to the parents, look, these are the grades. I mean, a lot of it's based on grades, right? If it's a pass-fail model, or if the grades are not what they need to be to move a child on. But in this case, a child could get great grades, could have straight A's even. But if a parent looks and says, well, but that's based on the fact that, we have a system here that's not, I know they're not ready to move on to the next grade. And that's not a fault of anybody's. It's just the world that we live in right now. Our school district's going to be able to manage the virus and teach these kids at a high level. That's what we have to see. And so really, it's not about whether the school district thinks they're ready to move on. This bill would put all of that power in the hands of parents.
Now, is there a financial component to this? Are school districts required to pay for that student to take those courses again?
Oh, absolutely. There will be a financial component to school districts. And that's why I believe that, first of all, no parent would want this. I mean, I don't think any parents out there saying, oh boy, that would be great to have my child repeat a grade. They want their child to be able to move on. But above that, they need their child to be getting a quality education. And as long as school districts are offering that, I don't see this as something that is going to be used by many parents. But if you have a school district that is not meeting the standards of what these parents expect, and quite frankly, what taxpayers are paying for, then that's where you'll see maybe a larger group say, we think we need to do this again. I also think that the Department of Education needs to be monitoring this year in total. I mean, if the governor were to step in a few weeks and shut schools down the way he did in the spring, I mean, it could be conceivable that we just simply need to stop education and pick it up when we can safely do so, at least in the eyes of the Department of Health and Department of Education. And in that case, we could be going through school, all next summer. Nobody wants to see these things, but they have to be on the table if we're not willing to get these kids back into real face-to-face instructional classrooms.
So we've been talking about repeating a grade, but what if parents decided they wanted to repeat a class or two classes?
No, my bill deals specifically with grade levels. If a child is maybe struggling in one particular subject, that would have to be worked out, with the school district, and that happens sometimes as well, where maybe they need, an extra year of English. But if these kids are ready to go, if they want to go on to a post-secondary education of some kind, they have to be ready to do so. And what we saw in the spring, while school districts, I believe, did their very best, and some school districts did better than others, there were some school districts where kids were just simply left behind. And we're talking about 3 months of lost education followed up by a summer break. It was going to be challenging to start this year anyway. But every educational expert, and quite frankly, even health experts say it is best to have these kids face-to-face in the classroom. And I think school districts need to find a way to make that happen sooner rather than later, or we risk losing more months and possibly an entire year for these kids. And that's just not an acceptable outcome for any of us.
How does your bill address extracurricular activities? Would that be included too?
The original bill did. We did amend it to take out athletic competition. Other extracurricular activities would still be in there. So if, a child's repeating 5th grade and there's a 5th grade play, I mean, these kids are missing out on so many opportunities, whether it be a reading club, a high school musical, band, things that are not athletic competitions. Now, originally, I wanted to include athletics as well because I think it's a huge component. But there you do get into a situation where there is an age limit with the PIAA. And so to just have kids be able to repeat years could really push that age limit in a way that none of us were really comfortable with, because the idea of having a 20 or a 21-year-old on a football field against a 15-year-old certainly is a big difference. And so we removed the athletic component. Other extracurricular activities stayed in the bill. I want these kids to have these experiences. These kids, if they don't get these experiences, who knows how that affects them later on in life negatively. And so we need to make sure that in our efforts to manage the virus, we're not hurting these kids in more ways than if they would get sick.
So would there be a statewide standard for this process, or would school districts come up with their own standards?
It would be left school district to school district, but no school district could refuse a parent's request for this. But if they wanted to tweak the process a little bit by individual school districts, that could be allowed. I mean, I think what we were trying to do from the beginning was to empower local school districts, local control, to make decisions based on what they were seeing. Because as you know, Phil, not every community has been affected in the same way with coronavirus. Not every county, not every city, not every place in this Commonwealth. So we're trying to allow that local control. But look, the districts have to step up and make some of these decisions then.
Now, would your bill pass the House 197-5? That's a pretty strong bipartisan support. What did you have to do to reach across the party lines to get support for this?
Well, I think it's just simply the messaging of what the bill is. And once that we kind of clarified what it does and why we're doing it, I think it's hard for people to be opposed because they are concerned about what this year is going to bring. I mean, I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and they said, well, they just need to get we just need to get them some kind of education this year. And I said, well, no, that's not right. I mean, it's not just some kind of education. It has to be quality. It's not like these kids get to chalk these years up as just, well, it's 2020, so we got a lousy year. I'm going to pick back up next year at the next grade level. That's not how it works in education. That's not how it works for kids. So it can't just be some kind of education. It has to be quality.
What have you heard from school districts about this bill?
They're concerned. They're concerned that if they have a massive a group of parents that want this, and my answer to them is make sure that doesn't happen. By ensuring that the education is quality. I mean, that's all you can say. I mean, I don't want this to happen either. I want kids to get a quality education, but parents have to have options if they don't see that happening.
Where is the bill now?
The bill is in the Senate Education Committee. I'm sure it will be looked at. I don't know if there'll be a hearing of any kind or if Ali has to go over and talk about it. I don't know of a companion bill of similar legislation in the Senate, which often happens. This seems to be just a standalone right now. And look, I want this to be an idea along with, I think this is the number one issue for Pennsylvania families right now is will our children be getting quality education? Can we get them back in school? And so I hope this bill is a part of that conversation that is ongoing.
Have you heard anything from the governor about whether he would support it?
I mean, initially there was a remark by his press spokesman that they weren't real thrilled with any of the bills, whether it was Representative Reese's PIAA bill or my bill. But that as we've seen can change by the day. So we'll see what happens if it gets to his desk.
Well, we've been joined by Representative Jesse Topper, who represents the 78th District. Thank you for being with me.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Pennsylvania has 956 boroughs, each offering their own unique history and culture. PCN, in partnership with the Pennsylvania State